You know, the a theme of the high-profile detransitioners, uh, such as Sinead slash Watson and Helena, they are approached constantly by parents. Parents are always asking them
Yeah,
for
I know.
advice. So there's this huge, I guess, market or demand, let's say, for parents of gender questioning teens and
Yeah.
preteens and post-teens.
Well, yeah, and I heard Helena talking about that, and I've heard Watson a lot talking about Sinead, I should say, a lot talking about that, and it is tough because ultimately it's like they don't have an answer. They might have tips or they might have insight, but they don't have an answer. Like they can't say, "Oh, if you just do this." I actually listened to your last interview last night with, and Helena used the phrase emotional jujitsu, which I wrote down, and I thought that's just perfect what they're going through because it's like it's so difficult to navigate because it's like they can't be too aggressive. So it's that whole martial arts thing of like deflecting and avoiding the next move and all the rest of it that
You're
they're actually
speaking
having
about
to do.
the parents
Yeah, the parents with the
with
kids
their kids. Yeah.
who are seeing themselves as trans and looking at transition, and they can't take it on too aggressively. They can't just come in and say, "This is what I think of your current life choices," you know?
Yeah.
Or they can, but it's a hell of a strategy.
Yeah, I think like listening to the stories, I think quite often when they do, if they're too aggressive, then they can easily become estranged because the child
Mm.
will pull away from them. So it's keeping that balance, isn't it? If you want to keep the relationship, you've got to be careful how you challenge what they're doing.
Yeah, or even if you challenge it.
Yeah, at all. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in the 60s and 70s, well, okay, so I'm reading this book by Quentin Tarantino. It's his first novel, and it's a novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And
Hmm.
there's a part of the story, and there's so many stories within stories. It's a wonderful read, where he talks about Charles Manson's family and
Mm-hmm.
kind of that cult thing and picking up stray youth who have problems with their parents. And it seems like during that period, there was a lot of maybe this is perennial, maybe this is always happening, but there were a lot of people boomer age that kind of fled from the family structure and were kind of swept up into these different movements, spiritual movements or pseudo
Mm.
spiritual movements. But with this phenomena that we're witnessing and recording, it is somehow it's attracting youth and forming barriers from the parents, and not just the parents but just the entire lineage of history. I mean, it's and being a self, like it completely breaks down or it swallows them whole in such a way that they don't have any other roots except for in this gender
Mm.
identity thing. Is that fair assessment that this is kind of sweeping up young people?
I think it takes over the whole of their lives. Like when you really talk to the people, the detransitioners who were just in it, and it's like it's everything. It determines who they live with. It determines what they study. It determines the job they do, or the job they don't do. More to the point, and like obviously the whole of sex and romance revolves around it entirely. Um, it's not good. I mean, I think it's not good to live with people who only think the things that you think. I think it's self-segregating by political philosophy is a bad idea. Sheffield University came out a couple of years ago. Sheffield University in England in the UK, and they're segregating. They've got like LGBT, obviously, dorms. It
Yep.
was like, yeah, what could go wrong? Put all the gay boys
Yeah.
together. Brilliant. Can't see any flaw with that at all. And it's not good because, for a start, they're going to have no resilience. Because at some point, you meet a homophobe. I was put into student halls, and I was one of eight, all male. So yeah, one of them was kind of homophobic, and and that was it. And I just had to deal with it. So I don't think that you're helping people by saying, "Oh, we'll just shield you from that until you're what 21." And that's what these kids are doing. They're moving in with other people who have got gender snaz going on, some kind of gender notability thing. It's quite serious sometimes not very serious at all, but whatever. And then they've got no ability to function outside of that. It seems like.
So it's just to say, like, segregation it's not going to foster like understanding and acceptance, isn't it? For either side.
No, but then who had on their bingo card that America would rediscover segregation in the year 2020, which is apparently what seems to have happened.
And it's coming from the elite and the left and the colleges who are all about being cutting edge socially.
Yep. Yeah. It's also like, I don't know, I wish I had an invisibility cloak, because I would so just go to Portland with a notebook. But I don't think I would want to walk around Portland, because it seems to me that it's now like quite dangerous, frankly. But Portland is the epicenter of it. It's not that bad. No, I've heard a lot of bad stories.
Well, yeah, you see the footage and stuff. That's actually kind of a parallel point of studying a phenomenon such as Antifa, who you get a sense of them from their antics, which are just beyond the pale. So that's what you see over and over and over again. I don't know how much of a representative sample that is of what's actually going on in Portland. I have people that live in Portland who I'm close to. But this also, when speaking about this issue about young people being swept up in gender ideology and the ideological strain that has crept into LGBTQ, the rainbow crowd,
can't believe you just excluded Claire by missing off the I.
No,
no, I didn't. See, I don't know. Do you want to be in the group or do you not want to be in the group? No?
But it's your sexual orientation, Claire.
No, it's very controversial, including the I, though, isn't it? I'm not the only I who doesn't think it's a good idea to include us. So. Yeah.
But there's no statistic. I'd love to see, because it's a small group. You can't actually say like 60% of us would rather not or whatever. Be good if you could.
Most of the intersex orgs talk about the problems with it. They would say that of course, like if there's an intersex person who is LGB or T, that they should feel welcome, but the rest of us don't need dragging in with that. Because in the end, what happens is that we're talked over. Our medical needs are ignored, and they're our most pressing needs. So it doesn't really do us like any favors.
Well, if you put it on a spectrum, it's not really fair to do this, but to put it on a spectrum between biology and ideology, intersex would probably be the most biological of all of these different identity groups, because it is actually a physical issue that needs to be dealt with. Secondly, one step up from that would be homosexual people and bisexual people who are born that way or are wired in a way to be biologically attracted to the same sex. Then from there, you get into the transsexual, who can be homosexual or heterosexual with the autogynephilia. And then you have the Q, which is just any spicy straights, anybody who wants to put a ribbon in their hair and wear any sort of clashing neon clothing. And then you have then it just goes on from there. But somehow that's all packaged in this month-long parade.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of intersex writers have said, because ours is in the body. It's a physical difference in the body, which makes it very different to LGB and T. So yeah. I don't really understand why we're in there. I think it's just because the word sex is in there. So surely.
That's what I think.
I
think and it's also inter, which kind of implies some ability to move between things or whatever. Yeah. And it just kind of feels, I can see myself having fallen for that when I was 16, being like, oh, I'm really intersex because I'm different. Not just, if somebody hadn't sat you down and said, no, sorry, this is blindness, or this is left-handedness, or it's it's not something you can identify into. Either it's a feature which applies or it doesn't, but they're not being taught that.
There's also though then the trans as intersex, which I think, like, because I think sometimes we just sort of get dragged in because the T's bringing us with them because they want to be associated with intersex because they feel that gives them some legitimacy. Or
well, it's better than being paired up with a clownfish. If you can find a human example of something that's not either of the sexes, then it's closer to
trees. Trees is the thing at the moment. Extinction Rebellion tweeted about trees.
Wait, what?
Yesterday. I can't remember exactly. They've deleted it now. Something about
intersex trees.
Because there are trees that
self-pollinate.
And therefore trans people are legitimately the identity they claim to be. I don't know. It's that leap that they make, you know.
I knew I saw a trans person shedding acorns the other day. Yeah, and penguins for gay people. It's so weird because it's like you get penguins for gay, like, oh, some penguins again. It's like, okay, what if they weren't? What would that mean? Would that mean that we should have fewer gay rights? Well, how does that? I don't follow the argument particularly. It's very strange to me.
Well, when we're speaking about rights for the entire Rainbow Coalition, what are we even talking about other than clapping along and saying this is a right and that's a right? What is it to have a human right other than like internet service and access to water and free air? What is our human right?
I don't know what they mean when they say intersex rights, to be honest. On the Wikipedia page, you know how they have like for each country, you can go and look at what they're, and for the UK, and it says intersex people don't have the same rights as everyone else, and I'm unaware of what rights it is that I supposedly don't have. I don't know, and it doesn't explain. It just tells me that I don't have the same rights as everyone else, but I don't know.
What do rights mean in that context?
I don't know. It just doesn't say, just this sort of bland statement that apparently.
But that's what but that was very deliberate, isn't it? Because when they kind of got what they wanted, these organisations, and then they changed all of their specific wording on their web pages to just like we want everyone to have the right to feel comfortable, or just whatever, which is kind of blank check stuff, because then they can just keep on going and going and going. Nobody can explain what rights gay people don't have in a country like Britain. Nobody.
Maybe it's become synonymous with a bourgeois lifestyle in a way. Like a right is anything that you have equal access to or equal ease of access to. It's no longer about access, it's about ease of access and to
equitable access.
Yeah, equitable access. So you on a statistical level, you aren't able to achieve whatever, or there might be some drag in your social life. So you don't have the right as a gay man to be free of homophobia because that's in there. So your position is that you just have to deal with it, but this post-activist or decadent activist position is that should be wiped out. There should be no hate, right?
That good luck.
The right.
I don't think that's ever going to happen. I genuinely don't think that could ever happen. I don't know, maybe that's a bit bleak, but I don't see how. I don't see how you get to the point. I mean, everyone who's bullied, who's gay, knows that, like, the one person who bullied you at school, like, 15 years later, you find him living with a man who's 20 years older than him. Like, it's not difficult to work out what's going on there. So a lot of homophobic bullying comes from people who are dealing with their own difficulty, coming to terms with whatever it is. You can't legislate against that. We've just fallen into a trap of thinking that legislators just have to say something and then it's done. And this problem. I mean, Thatcher apparently said that in her last year in office. She was like, the problem with all of you people, all of her colleagues, was you just think you have to say something, and then it's done. And you don't. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be some
policymakers
kind of,
as wizards. They can just summon.
Yes. Yeah. I think that there has to be something in America which just breaks this, because the amount of rainbowage is absurd. It is absurd. I had no idea, because it's not going on in other countries. I think it is in Canada, but it's not going on in anything like the same way. in other countries, in Australia or in England or in Ireland. It's just not happening in the same, not with the same volume, like people going to the pet shop and there's a big pride flag up, people going to post office. That doesn't happen.
Although I did refuse to buy cat treats the other day because they had the rainbow pride flag on, and I just can't engage with it anymore.
No,
like,
I can't.
Cats have different cat treats.
Well, okay, so
And I don't think my cats care either. You know, I don't think they
can cats even see rainbows?
I don't know. That's a good point.
Bigots.
So it seems like there's a number of different things that we're kind of bringing up. There's the, I guess, the commercialization of the rainbow flag, which is like this cultural push. And I was just thinking about that because now Amazon and Netflix, they're no longer trying to create content that I'm interested in. They're trying to push content on me that they think I should be watching, right? With different racial and sexual explorations and representations. So there's the commercial aspect, which is just that whole broad side of identity politicking. Then there's the policy aspect. And Angus, when you brought up the differences between these different countries, while America might be going full steam on a commercial level, you have a lot of things in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada that are pretty, I would say, authoritarian, using.
Oh yeah, and in Britain, I mean, it's easy to fall into the trap because there's been a lot of success, largely from feminists, in fighting against certain bad policies, and it's been good, but only by comparison. Right, it's like having a really fat friend at high school, so you can stand next to them and not be the fattest kid in the year. That Britain looks good, but it's only because it's like, yeah, we look good next to, and it's very brittle, the situation in Britain. It could change at any point, because you're right. In America, it's a lot more corporate, and your law and your constitution, to an extent, protect you. Whereas in Britain, the legal situation is very ropey. Because we don't have that we don't even have a written constitution. And so it's been a bit more, I'd say, the pushback culturally has been a bit more successful. But I'm always kind of a bit worried that people in America kind of think Britain's going to lead the charge on this. And legally, without getting into all of the weeds of it, politically and legally, it's not that secure a situation. It could change at any point.
Well, secure with regards to what? And brittle with regards to what?
Well, with regards to, so a lot of, if you look at like the Bell case, for example, that's all just case law. So another judge can come in and say something different, and then it changes everything. And people don't necessarily understand how important case law is in Britain, because most of our laws are not made by politicians. They're made by judges interpreting precedent and case law. It's quite rare for politicians to kind of weigh in on this stuff, and they'd rather sit back and watch it all going on. So the things which have happened, like the First Data case, that wasn't politicians who did that. I mean, they've taken an interest. There have been people like Baroness Nicholson and so forth who have taken an interest, but it's really the legal system fighting it through precedent and campaign groups and people raising money to fight cases and so forth. It's not that we've had some great salvation delivered via, constitutional rights or something.
So it's just interesting how precarious you're making me think British law is, especially when it starts to concern itself with cultural matters, because cultural matters can turn on a dime. There is no real precedent. It's just whoever is in the room and what they feel or where they come from or their history or the pressure that they're under. There's no... The culture, once the law gets invested in culture, and the same thing with policy in a more legislative country, once the policymakers start to try to engage with culture, it's always a bad turnout because it can't possibly be good for everybody because not everybody thinks the same way and agrees the same way. And if you want to enforce thinking at the government level, you have a totalitarian state.
But that's why I think I'm more interested in the culture of this than the law of this, because the laws can be in whichever jurisdiction, the laws can be overturned. Maybe less so if you've got like constitutional protections, but then they're only they only work if they mean something to people. Every country in the world has a piece of paper which says our citizens have the right to free speech. North Korea has that. every country does. And it's like, well, if it doesn't actually work in practice, then it's not worth having. But I think that for me, the big thing is turning this ship around so that kids are no longer thinking, wow, it would be really brave of me to start taking pills every day and have body parts cut off, which I just don't think there's anything brave about that per se. And that's really cultural. It's to do with where our culture's got to and how we can give them something else. And that's the bit that's missing. It's all fine and well for people to go on Twitter and make fun of these clowns who are kind of coming out with nonsense, like trans rights activists. And they do come out with nonsense, and they are total clowns. But then what else have we got to give them? Exactly. Because like you say, Netflix is giving you, it's not trying to entertain you at all. The pretense has gone now. It's trying to shame you and possibly educate you, but mainly shame you. That's my take on it.
Claire, do you have a ray of hope or despair to shed on this?
I don't know. I fluctuate between the two, and I always have doing this. You have like glimmers of hope, like with the fourth state, with Maya's judgment. It was, that the fact that the gender critical belief is now protected in law is a good thing. But then, like Angus says, what's to stop someone bringing a different case and then it being decided differently? So, and like with the Kira Bell for now we're in a good place with that, but the appeal's just being heard. We don't know the outcome from the appeal yet, and who knows how that will go. And it just feels, because it's just like an ongoing like battle. I don't know. I hope I don't know, but I do hope that in the end, like, common sense or whatever will prevail. And I think I do think I was looking at Twitter over the weekend. Obviously I'm not on there now, but like I was looking at Twitter at the weekend and
lurking.
Yeah. And I was looking at like sort of the ratios on some of the tweets, and I think like it looks like the tide is turning on there. It looks like there's more pushback against things, and that makes me feel quite hopeful. But you just don't know, do you? Like just thinking about the freedom of speech thing in Scotland, they had they brought out the hate crime law this year, and it's the most unpopular bill that has ever been proposed.
Well, isn't that the one where even in your own home,
you're
not allowed to express a bad
you can't
view.
Express an opinion, yeah. And I actually met with the guy who wrote the law, because intersex was included, and we objected. And we met with him, and it was more him meeting to tell us that what we should think.
That guy's a piece of work. There's some footage of him hating on a number of different groups. Well, no, it's all the same group that he hates on. He's got a very pointed hating prod.
Is that a member? Who are you talking? If you don't mind saying, who are you talking about? Is that a member of the Scottish?
Me?
Oh, yeah.
Well,
no,
Yusuf.
yeah, you.
Yeah, Yusuf.
You met Hamza Yusuf.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We had a meeting with him for DSD families. Right. I attended the select committee as well, who object to it, and but it didn't make any difference. What we said made no difference, because they'd already decided they were going to tell us what was hateful to us, and that was it.
Yeah. You know how Benjamin has a way of saying, what is it you say, like, white? Yeah, you should. I don't know. You've probably seen the speech. There's a speech of him standing up in the Scottish Parliament talking about how like everyone's white. Have you seen that speech?
Yeah,
and it's
so
like
ridiculous.
Because Scotland's like 96.5% white. Like, what are you talking about? You nut job. Yeah, and the way he says white as well is really like marked. It's really very strange. It's like white, and kind of wow. Dude, you're really angry. Like, why?
So, okay, so there's like the really big cultural and policy level stuff up there, and then the way it reflects down in reality, as far as Angus you're concerned, and Spec, which is a project that I think you're both involved in, right? Which is
oh yeah.
Well, could you tell me what that acronym means. Every time I do an interview, I have to learn a new acronym.
I don't think it really stands for anything at all. I think it obviously comes from gender spectrum at some point, like kind of the idea of pulling. But I think there was also the idea that it's like inspect, as in to inspect something, to look into it. So spect being the eye.
To perceive,
right?
yeah.
To perceive.
Gear.
Yeah.
Peer.
Yeah, so what we're doing in one sentence is providing a voice for these people that goes out into the world. We're not doing support.
So by these people, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, I should say. So the parents with these gender questioning kids, where the parents aren't happy. The parents think this is bad care, poor care. And it's not just about the care. I mean, it's primarily the care. It's also about like. So we had a parent who was interviewed for the Daily Telegraph, because we've had a few good media hits in our first couple of weeks, and we had a parent who was interviewed for the Daily Telegraph where, you know, from her point of view, which has a right to be heard, she's saying that the kid got a lot of this from TV, like children's TV in particular, that he was being sort of indoctrinated into seeing himself in this way because the children's TV is obsessed with this now. And Stella was on the radio. It was a really good interview, actually, because there's some math for an American audience problem that's come out in Britain. And it's kind of like the question that they're asking 5 and 6-year-olds is, Joe, who identifies as non-binary, has 20 bottles. They then take away 6. Yeah, exactly. It's got nothing to do with calculation. So they're now putting this stuff into the curriculum. So Stella went on the radio to speak about that. I think we do sometimes focus a lot on health, and the education stuff is serious. You know, what's going on in the schools is terrifying, I think. Like to talk to 5-year-olds about non-binary identities is just deranged.
And
I think schools have massively overstepped their place. And I say this as a teacher regarding this. Like I don't think what they're doing really is like within legally what they're allowed to do. But like a lot of things here, you know, they've been sold this sort of policy that they must adhere to by Stonewall, mermaids, organisations like that. And it's been represented as though it's the law, and then the actual laws in schools are overlooked. We had I know we've not like come to a conclusion properly, Jen, about what we're going to do with this, but I was looking at, there's actually, there are legal regulations for how children with medical conditions should be used in school. And they're not followed for children with gender dysphoria, because instead it's sold as this identity rather than a medical condition. So schools are doing things that really they shouldn't be doing, but because they've been told to by the experts.
And we can't. The thing is, we can't come to a conclusion on it because every time we talk about it, it gets bigger. Oh God, we need to bring in this thing as well, and this thing as well, and it just snowballs. I think that the infiltration of Mermaids and Stonewall, those two organisations in particular, with like children's charities in the UK and schools and all the rest of it, I think a lot of people are now going, ooh, that's really worrying. I don't think any of these organisations who've thrown their lot in with Mermaids, I don't think they're going to be around in 20 years. Because I think that when people understand the magnitude of what's happened and that like across the world, potentially, I mean, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of young people will go through this, but like, and there's such high rates of autism and so many of them are gay and all the rest of it, that I think an organisation like Save the Children, which has thrown its lot in with Mermaids, I saw recently, like, are they going to survive this? I don't know.
I think some have really damaged their reputation. Like there was the NSPCC, which is another children's charity here, and they had Munro Bergdorf as an ambassador. And then it turned out Munro Bergdorf had been encouraging children to contact them online without other adults knowing, which is a big no here in safeguarding terms. There should be no contact between an adult and a child like that. So people complained to the NSPCC and sort of said, like, this is against your policy, so this person shouldn't be representing you. So the pushback initially then was that it was transphobic to object, and eventually then they did remove Munro as an ambassador. And then it turned out that the person who had sort of enlisted Munro was a gay guy, and there was video footage of him that he put online masturbating in the offices at work in like fetish gear.
Nice.
So people then went back to, and it was clearly linked to him, it was clearly traceable back to him, and people went to mermaids, and then it was sort of, oh, you're just all homophobes, and it was kind of like, no, we just think people shouldn't be masturbating in the toilets at work and fetish wear at a children's charity, regardless of their sexual orientation. And I think like they're just really sort of massively damaging themselves by, the shouting of bigot at people who are actually just like, I know the trans activists laugh all the time, actual legitimate concerns. I know that gets thrown back at sort of gender critical people all the time, legitimate concerns, but they are legitimate concerns that we would have about anyone in such an organisation behaving like that.
So you're saying you hate me?
Well,
no, it's extremely patronising, because it really genuinely suggests that you just expect lower moral sexual standards of conduct from somebody for being gay. Like I'm just generally not going to understand that it's probably a bit impolite if I just start having a wank now while you're both, so why would that be something that I don't understand? And that's the bit that's quite disturbing, because of course it causes massive actual homophobia. I don't know if I said this last time, but I read the far right, the actual far right. I go onto the far right websites and I read what they're saying, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying, because they just think that we're all behind this. Like, everyone gay wants to push kids into transition. That's one of the things that motivates me.
There's the event at this spa that went viral, and then a protest that went viral again at the spa, where apparently there was an intact male that was in a changing room or a sauna, and there were women and I believe underage girls in that room. And then there was a big dust up outside where one of the women went after him, or was making a big scene, right? And so then people started protesting about, what space, where do genitals belong? And then that scene is transphobic. So then you have Antifa, who are the crime fighters for justice, coming in and like beating up old women who hold the wrong sign, right? So but it comes down to, how do you convince people? It's just so weird. We're at a point in time where you aren't allowed to say that men don't belong in women's spaces. Males don't belong in women's spaces. And I think people pick that up on their radar, but it's so absurd. I don't know if people really understand that all this rainbow stuff does actually... I'm sorry. So how do we have to sort out, homosexual, all these different people who don't want this to happen, who are being represented by this rainbow melange, but that's smuggling some really civilization reordering ideas, very fundamental ideas that affect spaces for men and women, safeguarding for children, and then affect young people's motivations on what a self is and how to actualize that in this identity world, where everybody just treats each other like marketing or like packaging. Like, I'm gluten free, I'm corn syrup free. Like I have a K kosher sign. Like, that's how we know what we are.
We just have to get rid of the rainbow, though, don't we? I don't know. Is it salvageable at this point? Who wants it? I mean, I know there are people who want it, but what proportion of them belong in it, for a start?
You are saying that the far right wants to blame everything on everybody, the whole thing. They want to lump it all together and denounce the whole thing and just steamroll the whole thing. You're kind of saying the same thing, though. You just want to take off the rainbow. Well, I want you to distinguish what you mean by like getting rid of the rainbow and how that's different.
I mean, just kind of. Well, no, I mean saying. So we had a party in the UK called UKIP, right? And UKIP wanted to take Britain out of the European Union, and then we had a vote, and it did, and then UKIP died. And it's like, great, job done. Well done. You've got what you wanted. What is it that they want? What do the people kind of working for these organisations, what do they actually want? Apart from an income, obviously, what rights are left? I would take them a lot more seriously if they said, right, we're doing Iran now. Off we go. We're going to stand outside the Iranian embassy. Then I would think, yeah, fair play. Okay, you mean it. But they don't. And No, I think what the far right are doing is they're taking this as evidence that homosexual men have always been knowingly paedophiles, and that the two things are synonymous. And they believe that. I take them very seriously in their belief. I believe that they believe that, and I believe that they would act on it. And I don't want them to have arguments that they can take to people on the right, and then on the centre right, and then on the centre, as this gets worse and worse. And those arguments start to kind of pour outwards from that, because there's no centre ground anymore. So you either have to pick, sterilise all the kids, let the guys into the changing rooms for the women with their fully intact biology, teach 4-year-olds about non-binary stuff, or Gilead, Handmaid's Tale, Roundup. I mean, that's where things will go. I'm not talking imminently, but if we keep on going like this for decades and decades and decades, that's where things will go. Surely. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am.
I think, but it's like, I don't think it's not like fantastical to think like that. Like, it happened here with Pi and so the paedophile information exchange, and because they infiltrated using gay rights as like the vehicle to get in there. And then when the pushback came against gay people as well, didn't it? That's how we ended up with Section 28 and things like that. So it's not unreasonable.
What's Section 28?
That was, it banned teaching about being gay in schools, or even like mentioning that gay people exist in schools. And then that was.
How long did that last, and what decade are we talking about?
So it was. Angus, you might know better than me.
It
started in the 80s, and then it carried on for quite a while afterwards. I can't remember exactly when that stopped. But
it was sometime in the late 90s, wasn't it, or mid 90s? I'd say. It went on for some time. Yeah, and the paedophile information exchange just kind of. The gay rights people were saying love is love, and the paedophiles were like, yeah, love is love, and standing behind, ready and waiting. And but as Archie Morty has pointed out, well, actually the way that resolved itself is those people were hounded out. They were told, you're not welcome here. And that was led by certain prominent people in the gay rights movement. I mean, I'm not somebody who has this great deal of knowledge about the history of the gay rights movement, but my understanding was that largely the thrust of opinion was, no, you don't belong here. Whereas now we're fighting well, if we believe what we're led to believe, then supposedly I'm in the minority. I don't know.
So now we have children at Pride alongside people in their fetish gear, and it's all. I think you're right, Angus, as well, because I think people will look at that and they will think that confirms everything that they think about gay people. So the homophobes, it just confirms like everything that they think when they look at pictures like that.
So celebrating acceptance for homosexuals can be conflated as celebrating sexuality, can be conflated to making sexuality public as a public commodity to celebrate. And then we're no longer celebrating acceptance of, a statistically significant portion of the community. We are now adulating sexuality as something that you are to be known for. I think that maybe rather than rolling back just the rainbow, just keep it in the bedroom.
The rainbow in the bed. Well, also, do we need to be celebrated? Haven't we done that? Isn't it time for this party to be over? It's like, okay, we've been. So this is like the kind of perma birthday. Like you could never. It's like one of those. Did you ever have in town where you were growing up like a Christmas shop, Claire? Do you know that there was like one little shop and all year round it just. And I always used to think, imagine working in that shop, like be mid-March and you'd be like elves every day, elves, and that's where this has got to with the rainbow stuff. And it's like, well, that's not a celebration then. The whole point of Independence Day, which you've just had, wouldn't work if it was like Independence Year. Well, then you wouldn't have it. This has gone beyond a celebration now. And it's also just so exploitative. I mean, the way that anyone who dares to kind of defer from it is immediately, well, if I were woke, I would say hetero-splained at, that the straight people come and tell you that you don't really understand what's in your best interests as a gay person, which if I were woke I would call heterosplaining, right? Like, they'll happily do that. And as you say, what, you know, when you met Hamza Yusuf and you were just told, Claire, like, no, sorry, we need to explain to you that you're a bigot. And so that's not celebration. And it's not meant as celebration either.
Well, it's going to have there is going to be a hangover. I just, like you were saying, Claire, like if something has a rainbow on it, like I'm not going to support that anymore because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, now I got a rainbow fedora. It's in the other room. I should have wore it to this conversation because I just want to reclaim it back as just this colorful mishmash of glitter things that everybody can be a part of. It doesn't really mean anything. But
it's really sad here because during COVID, when lockdown happened, they got kids to make rainbow posters. Nothing to do with the LGBT. It was to do with the NHS and like celebrating the NHS. You know, they were going to work and looking after people, and we were all stuck in our homes. So it was a way to show like appreciation for them, and that was really nice. And then Pride Month's come around, and suddenly all these rainbows in the windows, they look sinister now. You know, it's got a very different like tone to it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, there's just it. So again, like there's the cultural phenomena, but why do we care about this? Why do we care about this? What is the consequences that we really care, that we're really trying to target, or that you two are trying to target and worried about?
Well, speaking for myself, there's kind of like the selfish one, which is I genuinely think there's going to be a massive backlash, massive, and I don't want to. I want receipts. I want to be able to say, no, I did my bit, my small bit, whatever it was, and with whatever limits, I did my bit. And then I think beyond that, it's, you know, I know there's somebody who's in Gen Spec, and I don't want to say too much because it's personal, but whose child transitioned and then committed suicide in short order. And, you know, because a lot of people who transition do genuinely think it's going to solve all of their problems, because it's kind of like a factory reset of some kind in their mind, and then they do it, and then of course it doesn't solve their problems, plus they've got all the complexities of that major medical change, and that's lifelong. They can't undo it. And I think we have to find some way of turning that around, because the cultural fallout that there will be, I mean, more and more you meet just so many people now, it's almost harder to find somebody who hasn't got some kind of story where somebody they know, their kid is going through some sort of gender issue. And it's very, very rare for it to be plain sailing. I mean, I'm not saying for a second that everyone who's doing it is going to commit suicide. Of course I'm not. But I'm saying it's, you know, it's not an easy thing to go through. It's not an easy thing for parents to go through. It's not an easy thing for the kid to go through. It's not an easy thing to live with as an adult. I mean, you spoke to Corinna, right? Who's very open and honest about that, and fair play to her, because that can't be an easy thing to do. So my goal would be make this the last resort. Make this treatment pathway the last resort. And your first resort should be psychotherapy. You know,
it's just I just published an interview with a young man, Garrett, who was not prepared at all for the medical procedures that he accessed by, I guess, a total of 4 therapy appointments, for like 4 half-hour therapy appointments. He got his testicles removed and breasts implanted, and then he's like, wait, what? You know, but right. he went off to college. From what I gather from his story, he just went off to college, and he's like, oh, I'm genderqueer. And then that just started him down this road of thinking through all these things. And there was no resistance from the medical. Total malpractice. Total.
I was really struck the other day. I was reading some of our parents' stories, and they were talking about things that their children believe. So they were saying, like, one of them was saying she has a daughter and she started taking testosterone and her hair is now falling out. And the mum was saying, that's the testosterone you're taking doing that. And the daughter was saying, but why would testosterone react any differently to me than any other man? And, like, she absolutely convinced that she's a man and therefore it would do the same to her body. I mean, it technically is. It's giving a male pattern baldness, but, you know, but just that, like, just that really, it's quite frightening to think that she's being given that medication and she clearly doesn't understand her own body and doesn't understand the medication at all, if that's her level of thinking.
That's one of the things that we're going to try and do is actually, this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but try and get together a project, an animation project, to actually just show, like, this is what actually happens. This is what actually happens. This is like, okay, so you're a girl and you take testosterone. So here's month 1. This is what's happened in month 1. This is what happened in month 6. This is what happens in year 1, year 5, year 30. And just kind of spell it out. Because, yeah, like you say, they're just not told this. And coming back to the point, like, yeah, Garrett, who had four therapy appointments, I met a guy who reached out to Jen Spec from the US, and the wife died quite suddenly. The daughter developed anorexia, wouldn't talk about the bereavement, and had an appointment over the phone because of COVID. And as the basis of the over the phone appointment was given a prescription for testosterone. And anyone who would have seen her would have seen, okay, well, you're drastically underweight, so there's that. Can we talk about that? And it turned out the guy rang the clinician, and they didn't know that the mother had died. So they didn't know about the anorexia, and they didn't know about the bereavement. I mean, that is just absurd. And we're hearing more and more of these stories. So we've set up this forum, and parents are coming in, and there's a little channel where they can go and introduce themselves, and it's quite terrifying, actually. I mean, it's a good thing that they're coming together with a view to sharing their stories, so it's a positive thing overall. It's better that it's better out than in, but it is very eye-opening.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from reading their stories. It's like a catharsis for them, isn't it? They come into the forum and just get it all out of their system.
Yeah, and then they meet people with a similar theme as well. Yeah,
so they feel less alone. But it's quite, I found, like, there's been times when I've been quite shocked at the things. I thought I knew, I had a good grasp of things, and I've been quite shocked reading some of the parents' stories because I had no idea quite how bad it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever been to one of the support groups, Claire?
No.
Yeah, you see, that will. So I have, and so I'm not quite so shocked. It sort of recalibrates your expectations, because they're pretty difficult. It's emotionally very, very difficult, and a lot of them are volunteer led, and it's just people all stumbling their way through the dark together until they actually come into contact with a clinician of some kind who's on their side. A lot of these parent groups are just like parents saying, okay, well, let's see if we can help one another, and not being plugged into the professional community. So, but I think that's changed this year. I really think that's changed this year, or it's starting to change.
How so?
Well, by things like what we're doing, which is because we've got so many clinicians who are actually it's a real type of interaction, that parents are actually interacting with clinicians. So parents coming in and telling a story, and somebody who is a dedicated academic working on this, or an MD or whatever it might be, is actually reading that. So they're starting to kind of pool, so that these two, because there's been over here, like on one side, you've had clinicians studying this and trying to debunk the bad science and put in good science and all the rest of it. And then over there, you've had parents who are really just in these support communities where they're trying to help one another. And there hasn't been, until very recently, an attempt to kind of pull those two groups and put them into the same space with a common purpose. And that, I think, is what has changed.
I think that's really important, because I think I hadn't thought about it till now, but like when the clinicians talk, and then you'll get the trans activists saying, "But that's not happening," you know. So the clinicians will say something like, "This is not a good idea," or like, "We don't think this is supported by evidence," or something like that, or "This might be damaging," and the trans activists they're saying that's not happened. You've no evidence. And meanwhile, and then you've got the parents over here who are the evidence, or the detransitioners. But when they speak, then they're told, but the clinicians don't back you up, the experts don't back you up. So bringing them together to speak together actually backs up what they're both saying, which is, I think, is really important.
Yeah. Plus trans activists and clinicians have very different standards to me, because a clinician has to be like, well, the plural of anecdote isn't data, whereas a trans activist is like, my one anecdote is data. Well, we don't even need to get to plurality. And so it's completely mismatched, because the clinicians have to meet this very high standard, and they have to make sure that everything they're saying is like exactly correct.
Insofar as they are being held to that standard, it's not being held. They're not. The medical industry as a whole is not holding itself.
Oh yeah,
up to
no,
the
I'm
standard.
just talking about the small group of clinicians which has tried to take this on. Through, I mean, it's SEGM, the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, and quite a few people from SEGM are also in GenSpec and are seeing that, seeing the parents coming in, and then the parents in turn are seeing the clinicians coming in, and the people who've been fighting that fight. So that is a genuine change. Like, nothing like that has happened so far, and it can only be for the good, I think.
Well, just this might be a very morbid thought, but getting back to your fears of an oncoming backlash that will target the gay and lesbian community, I think part of the work of telling the story of this entire topic is to show that the gay and lesbian community are being sterilized and being profoundly affected negatively by at least the affirmative care model of trans care. So there, I mean, it might slow down the reaction, especially when these parents say, well, my child is homosexual, insofar as they are saying that. And then they think that because they're attracted to men, they should be women now. That's a regressive framework to.
Yeah, I think that there's an extent to which it's difficult to get people to care as much about gay as they do about trans, because it's just not where the culture is right now. So a lot of people, I think, accept that point and then just kind of go, oh yeah, tra-la-la, and wander off from it and forget that, because there's no one who's really mounted any kind of serious critique of that point. Nobody has actually come back and said, no, you're incorrect. Actually, there aren't vastly elevated rates of homosexuality among young people who are trans-identifying or questioning their gender. Nobody has come along and said there's no correlation there. So the answer is never, no, that's wrong. The answer is, la, 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 we can't hear you. And I think the way that that's happening is because fundamentally trans is more interesting than gay now. It's where the zeitgeist is. And so
it's the frontier.
It's the frontier, and I think a lot of people know this in their hearts, and then they just kind of think, well, I mean, if that's the way it is. I don't know, maybe that's a bit cynical of me. Maybe people don't know that, but it's not like some great secret. Douglas Murray was talking about this when he wrote Madness of Crowds. I mean, that was like 2 years ago, was it now?
Mm-hmm. Well,
that's
we're coming on 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, and he was talking about that for some time, and yeah, I think to an extent we just have to find some way to get, as I say, get the culture to move on. We need these kids to be being like, yeah, trans, boring. That's really kind of 2020.
Well, there's I think one survey said that 30% of young people are identifying into the LGBT camp or something that's statistically, it's just, this is totally a fad. And especially with that cue there, you just say, well, you know what? I saw a boy says that he saw a boner once and he got a boner. I guess I'm bisexual now, kind of thing, So it's just this.
All the kids are bisexual now. All the kids. It's
or
the thing.
Or phrasexual or pherosexual. Turn on
my
my metal.
nephew, he's only 14. I was talking to him, and all of his friends, they're all bisexual, they're non-binary, they're trans, they've all got a, and really they're not. They're all just very confused because they're in their early teens. They've got a lot of hormones rushing through them. They haven't quite sorted out really who they are yet, but they're being asked, like, what are you? And they feel they have to label it. And bisexual, I suppose, feels like the most comfortable because it kind of gives you options still. Like,
well, it's polite as well. It's polite because if I'm not bisexual, if I'm homosexual, then it's like, well, I'm not sexually attracted to you, Claire. So, and I think they genuinely see that as a form of rudeness almost.
Yeah.
And I think also with a lot of the, I don't know, it feels like it's politeness, and then sometimes it almost feels like not blocking the fire exits. They can just leave as many options open as they like because they're also paralyzed. I think part of that is to do with porn. I think it's much more than just porn. I think it's the way that the visual has overtaken every other sensory experience, and they're paralyzed and they're trapped, and it just feels like they're leaving their options open, but they're not meaningfully. And they're also not having relationships or leaving the house.
Yeah.
Critically. Yeah. I
don't think they really know what it means as well either. Like, speaking to my nephew, and he just seemed really confused because there's still like an element of the little boy in him that like hero worships, superheroes. And sort of, well, I like this actor that played Spider-Man once, and that doesn't mean that you're sexually attracted to him.
Listen, Brad Pitt's allowed. You can have a crush on Brad Pitt, and that doesn't affect your sexuality at all. Yeah. You get 1 to 5 celebrity crushes, and that doesn't impact your sexuality at all.
1 to 5? That's a lot. I would have put it like 1 or 2, but okay.
Well, I want to be embracing of our culture, and give kids some options and stuff.
Well, it's just really unfair because it's like you can make a colorblind person recite exactly what red is. Like, you can teach them to say it's a color, like totally colorblind, it's a color that's next to orange and, and it's associated with danger or whatever. But if they can't see it, they can't see it. And these kids are coming home from school and they've got no means to understand what sexual attraction is, which is why we used to think so much about, well, what age do you do sex ed? And it was very phased, and it was like, okay, so certainly in my school, like the girls were taken off and they did something different with the girls because obviously they had to know when menstruation was coming, they had to be prepared for that, and they did something else with the boys, which was really just teaching us to be nice. And then it was kind of, I guess, when I was 13, 14, we got the other end, like the remainder of sex ed, when we were actually in a position to understand it, when we were actually in a position to kind of say, like, okay, yeah, I can recognize that feeling. And now they're getting it all at like this absurdly young age.
I think they're making sex quite scary as well. If you like, I can't remember if we talked about this, Angus, but there's the dice game that was introduced into British schools. So you have a dice and it has body parts on it, so like vagina, anus, fingers, mouth, but on both dice. And then the idea is that the kids will roll the dice, and whatever it lands on, then you have to say what sex act you could perform with those two body parts.
Wait, what?
Do you want me to explain that? Is that a wait what because you can't believe it, or I need to explain
what?
again?
wait, with this? Okay, this wasn't just like
This is in schools.
So this wasn't just a party game.
No,
this was actually part of the curriculum.
Like a party game, but yeah, it's part of relationship and sex education. This was put into schools, and I think that just makes it so frightening for a child as well. You don't even think about
knees go.
Yeah, I don't think you need to know about fisting at that age. Just kind of we can sort of let them discover things later as well. It's too much too soon.
It's like Cards Against Humanity's infiltrated the British school system. It's crazy.
And when I first saw it, I didn't think it could be real. I genuinely thought no one kind of.
No, it's Titania McGrath.
Yeah, and I went and checked, and it was actually.
What's it called? Porno dice? I have to look this up. Maybe I should start selling them for my merch department.
Maybe you could do the other end, and what you could do is like just balance things out by going to like fetish parties and orgies and selling them dice which have like facts about British history. Like, the Battle of Waterloo and fingers. What can you do with those two things? It's who are these teachers? What is wrong with your teacher? Come on, account for yourself.
Well, I think the thing is, I think though, part of the problem is that resources like that are often not made by teachers. They're made by LGBT groups who then send them into schools. I do have a problem with any teacher who would use that as a resource. I have a massive problem with it because they've lost their mind and they've forgotten what the purpose of their job is, and that's really inappropriate. But yeah, it's not, and it's a problem in British schools. Anyone can make a resource and send it into school and claim to be the expert on the subject.
And would you have autonomy? I mean, I suppose it depends on the school, but would you have autonomy as a teacher to decide if you're going to use that, or would it be like the head teacher would make that decision for the whole school?
It would usually be like a scheme that was brought in for the whole school to use. So it would be, I mean, you could go as a teacher and say, I'm not teaching this, but you could, it's going to depend on your head teacher whether or not that conversation goes well.
Wow.
It's just, I mean, over here, we're starting to see more and more pushback against what's called critical race theory, which is a broad term, but especially parents are standing up to school boards and saying that we don't want you to teach basically all the laws that are banning it. Or banning it, so-called, just say that you can't say one group is superior to another group. You can't blame everything on a group of race, and you can't say that America is inherently racist. And in Washington State, when they were crafting their equity bill that teaches equity and critical race theory, basically, in every level from kindergarten up to postgraduate work, every year you have to take this stuff. The Republicans tried to put in an amendment that said that you can't teach that one group is inferior or superior than another, and you can't say that America is racist. And the Democrats, who control everything now, said, no, we're not going to add that. And we're not going to. It's crazy stuff. Like the Republicans say, could you at least define what equity is? And the Democrats say, no, we're not going to define what equity is. So there is pushback with regards to race in America, and that's a very American story. It doesn't export to Britain. But what's not being called out over here is the very slow incremental pouring of this queer theory into the curriculum, which is happening. It's not as visible because we have this race issue going on over here. It's more visible or at least I would hope that parents over in your neck of the woods are becoming more aware of the gender stuff and standing up against it. I don't know if parents even have a voice over there, like a parent-teacher meeting or something.
No, there's not as much stuff as, well, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on this, but the kind of things like you have the kind of town hall political culture, and I know that a big chunk has been taken out of it recently because people don't feel quite so free to speak as they once did, but you still have that town hall culture. We really don't have that kind of
some of the queer theory, I think, because they introduced a new subject called relationship and sex education this year, and it was very controversial anyway, and that's how a lot of this stuff has come in, is through that. And because that was controversial anyway, it was in the news. So I think there are some parents who are aware of that. But it's interesting because they're trying to bring critical race theory into schools here, which the government they have said that they're not really keen on that. And I think less people are aware of that. So it's interesting how it's like switched in the two countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also interesting because it's like we have different racial demographics, and also at the last election there was quite a big swing of a number of ethnic groups towards the Conservatives. Quite a big swing.
You see that British, over here too.
Which
is
British
inconvenient for the Democrats.
Yeah, and that's also reflected in the political leadership. So there have been a couple of people who've really taken a stand against this from the Conservative front bench, Kemi Badenoch, Priti Patel, and various other people who. So it's kind of a bit inconvenient. There was actually a minute in the Parliament where there was this white woman for the Scottish National Party stood up and started talking about like the oppression faced by and then this black Conservative was like, what are you talking about? Like, and then the white Scottish National Party woman was like berating her, going, you're so oppressed, you're oppressing yourself, why can't you understand it? This government is racist. It's very odd. It doesn't translate well at all. What was the example that I can't remember, some organization brought in the term BIPOC, black and indigenous people of colour, and somebody had to point out that the indigenous people in Britain are white. So BIPOC is literally everyone.
It's so funny. I once heard someone from like that end of the political spectrum talking about black people in the UK, and they refer to them as African Americans. It's just amazing.
Well, and do you remember when there was, I can't remember when it was, but there was the riots. Do you remember there were those riots? Like, it must have been like 8-9 years ago. There were those riots in London. Can't remember when it was. And it turned out that all these kids were texting one another, and they were calling the police the feds. Because of our federal... I don't know what our federal was. We're not even a federal country. We're a unitary. Yeah, it's so confected. Yeah. And
there's I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody was talking about the British identity as not a racial identity at all. You can be a British person anywhere in the world. It's a national identity. It's a cultural identity. And I think it was kind of a talk by a person of color, so-called, who was very British. And he said that it doesn't really make sense. And what we're losing is that national identity, like in America. And it's been under assault by our intellectual organizations. Every 4th of July, they have to attack the Constitution. They have to, point out all the hypocrisy in America instead of celebrating it one day. Like they pile on that one day. So we're losing that glue that keeps Americans together, which is kind of, I think, would be the basis of a conservatism, is just a kind of a collective understanding of
civic identity.
Civic identity.
Yeah, in Britain, there's a lot of evidence suggesting that people who are not white find it much easier to identify with the term British than the nations which constitute Britain. They're much more reticent about calling themselves English or Welsh or Scottish. But so British sits above as a kind of civic identity. And then within that, you've got like Scottish, which is a much more ethnic identity. To an extent, it doesn't work quite that cleanly, but it's very unusual in the old world. That's quite normal in the new world. Like Brazil functions a bit like that. Australia functions a bit like that you can be Korean and Australian, or you can be, there's quite a big Japanese community in Brazil. But in the old world, Britain's quite unusual in that regard. And most European countries have the opposite problem, which is that they don't have a term which can function as a civic identity. And they're kind of trying to convert what is ultimately an ethnic identity. They're trying to kind of upgrade it into a civic identity. And it's difficult to do.
Do you guys have the same thing as like African American, Japanese American, Korean American? Do you guys have those hyphenated identities out there? Scottish, British?
Not really.
Indian,
No,
British?
I was talking to an American friend about this last night, and I was saying to them, I find it when Irish, because my family were from Ireland, and I find it really funny when you hear Americans talk about being Irish American and that they're Irish, and kind of, no, you're American. Like I wouldn't call myself like Irish British. That sounds really weird to me. So, and I think if I tried it, people would just laugh at me. Like,
the Irish have a special word for Irish Americans. They're not Irish. It is. No, we don't have. I suppose we would do with like Chinese British, but Scottish British just sounds absurd. It just sounds like you've got some kind of weird, dysfunctional, indecisive stutter. Like, that doesn't work at all, does it?
Well, everything is a ish out there. So you have Welsh, Scottish, British, Irish, and then the Englandish. Well,
the famous Englandish.
English.
Yeah, no, but that's one of the reasons. I was on the radio the night before last, and the guy asked me, like, why is America different from Britain in all of this? And it's like, well, it's very difficult, I think, in American culture to sneer at somebody who's reinventing themselves, because you nearly all descend from people who reinvented themselves, right? I mean, most of you descend from people who came from another country and then sailed or flew across an ocean and decamped and maybe changed their name at Ellis Island and started again. And so I think with the whole gender identity thing, I think that there's a sort of natural disadvantage that you have, because people are predisposed to be positive about this idea of starting afresh. It's kind of, your culture. And that also, it's not just America, that also holds for like Australia as well. Whereas I think we're quite skeptical, Claire, of people who reinvent themselves. It's like, yeah, what are you trying to hide?
Yeah, suspicious of it. Yeah.
Yeah, who do you owe money to or something? Yeah,
Yeah,
you're obviously on the run.
That you guys are connected to such a long lineage, and it's embedded in the land. You guys there's probably something from the 15th century a block away from both of you, I'm sure, that's still standing or functioning. Even just a fence or a pile of rocks or something, if not older than that. So that informs your sense of self and of place that we are lacking. We're very mobile, and then on top of that, the internet takes that to an even greater degree. To how do you identify into a national identity? Maybe gender identity functions as a national identity too. Like the queer, you're a part of the queer. That's this kind of floating nation of or this nation state of identities.
Well, they're obsessed by flags. They're obsessed by flags.
True.
And it's like, I mean, you want flags because if you look at the kind of that whole community, it's sort of, somebody called it Linnaean. You know how like you have Linnaean structures in biology, like quercus is an oak, and it's like they've all got layers to their flags. Like they make flags for like, well, this is a flag for bisexual non-romantic NBs, or like and so on. So that, I mean, that's identity. It's giving you some common point which then connects you to somebody else or differentiates you from somebody else in a friendly way. I think it is like a national identity.
If there was something for them to fight over, maybe we could instigate some sort of war game among them. But I don't know what. They don't have territory or anything. It's all just they're claiming identity out of the other. So it's nothing to. It's an infinite resource.
So the three of us should get like burner accounts and go in and infiltrate the NBs and like declare war on. Who can we declare war on? I don't know. The NBs could declare war on like the
asexuals, maybe.
Yeah, but then that's going to be tough for the asexual NBs. You're asking them to make it difficult. It's going to be like being a Japanese American. It's going to have to be interned.
No. There's some rich territory. We could at least come up with some sort of German board game with a whole bunch of different points. It would just be some sort of the Battle of Pride or something like that. And you just
yeah, but it's there is a sort of
you would find your sexuality with Claire's teaching dice, like your finger in an anus.
This sounds like we're going to play like Dungeons and Dragons or something.
Well, it is a role-playing game. I saw that at Evergreen. They had a survey for incoming, your male, female, or X for your biological, and then your gender. They list all the gender. It's like you're filling out a character sheet. You don't get like a stat bonus at all, or any sort of superpower by identifying into these groups, but it means something to someone somewhere.
It's like we just had the census here this year. And obviously there was a lot of discussion beforehand about what would be in the questions. And they kept sexual orientation, they kept it traditional, homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual. And I thought there was a thing I think it was on the BBC where the asexual saying, and they just felt really excluded that they hadn't been asked about their sexuality. And there was one guy who was saying, because I'm an asexual homosexual, so where was my box? It's like, well, your box was homosexual. Like, the fact you don't have sex very often or not very interested in it is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, the census is collecting data on that.
They're not looking for a pen pal for you. They just want the basic information.
Get somebody from the census rings and it's like, right, okay, so we found you some local bars. We've set you up with a stylist. Let's get this sorted out. Yeah.
Well, it's just weird because the colleges are reifying this. So it's a movement now. 30% identify into this, and so colleges kind of come along and say, well, we want to be able. The statisticians want to be able to quantify this data somehow, but it reinforces the entire imaginary thing. What is genderqueer? What does it actually mean? And can you not be genderqueer for a day and then you're something else? So that category is not stable. It's not tied to a territory. It's tied to a flag, but it's not tied to a territory. It's not tied to a body.
No, and it's also a story without an ending, that they're believing in something and they're putting an awful lot of weight on something which is ultimately not going to deliver them anywhere, in the sense that if you were part of, let's say, a support group for families with DSD in the family, or if you were part of a support group for like gay people who'd grown up in a homophobic environment or something, then at least you would have, there would be a defined goal, and somebody would be saying to you, we're going to provide you with something, and you could measure it. Whereas they're not getting anything from that. And it's,
and
I think
that
it's
makes
quite
transition
sad.
inevitable, because they have to materialize all these ideas. They have to end thinking about these ideas, so they'll put it on their body. I can imagine some people unconsciously going through this and start with this identity that doesn't really mean anything, but it festers in their head, and they need to prove it. They need to prove it. They need to have it in the world. And then you have this whole medical apparatus that won't even investigate that at all. They'll just implement your wishes like on some sort of conveyor belt. And then what do you have? And then you're like, well, this isn't real.
Well, then what you have is the euphoria-dysphoria cycle. So you go through whatever medical change you have, and then you have a period of euphoria, which lasts anything between like 5 minutes and I don't know how many years, probably not that many. And then what tends to happen, and I'm not claiming this is universal, is that they then have some kind of crash where they're like, okay, that didn't actually solve anything. But the problem is there's the next thing. So it's like, okay, well, so it could be a young woman, and she could say, okay, so I had my mastectomy, my double mastectomy, and it made me feel better, and I was jauntily springing down the street wearing a T-shirt, feeling like, okay, all my problems have been solved. And then that wears off, and they go back into the kind of dysphoria part of the loop, and they think, okay, well, the reason I'm dysphoric is because I haven't had the radical hysterectomy. So then they go and have that, and then it's like, well, that's not enough. So then I need the phalloplasty. And so what parents are put in a position of hoping for is that the dysphoria is that they get into is bad enough that it breaks the cycle, but not so bad that it tips the kid over the edge. So like if a kid does go through a surgical procedure, the parents kind of want them to have, well, the parents who understand this cycle and think it's relevant want them to kind of crash so badly that they crash out of it and see, okay, this is not helping me. But don't want them to crash so badly that they are genuinely...
They take themselves out of the loop of life.
Right, so that they self-isolate, and then they turn to drugs and alcohol and self-harm, and then potentially the worst happening. And that's the horrible thing with these hormones, is because they do change you. My friend Renee Jack says, you know, these are the two most powerful drugs in the world, testosterone and estrogen. And I think that that's correct. I mean, just because you don't have an immediate hit from them, as you would from, like, I don't know, cocaine or heroin or something, does not mean they're not incredibly powerful, what they can do to your bodies. People can recover from years of heroin usage, but it's quite different from what hormones will do to your body.
Claire, do you have a ray of optimism or skepticism?
I always say these really bleak things, and then it's like, because I'm really used to it, I'm just like, yeah, so there's that.
The moribund Brit.
I don't know. I don't know how to follow that up.
Well, I suppose there is a good thing, which is that detransitioners are now starting to interact with parents in a way that's positive, because sometimes it can be a bit like, oh dear God, help us and help us now. And obviously detransitioners aren't really in a position where they can do that. But I think that there is slowly, like a detransitioner has joined our forum, the GenSpec forum, which nobody invited her. I don't know how she got the invite. It's great though, because she just kind of autonomously joined, and that's brilliant, because that suggests something organic going on, not some kind of forced, you know, arranged date of some kind. But it's like, I think that is a ray of hope, that people are, and there are a lot of detransitioners like Sinead and Helena who are really, really dedicated to helping, which is brilliant. Because,
well, we shouldn't underestimate what GenSpec are doing, just to give ourselves a pat on the back for a minute.
Yeah, we had a good media launch. We did pretty well, I have to say. Like, we got on TV, we got on radio twice, 3 times now, and we got 2. You were in Medscape. Yeah.
Is there a collective?
People heard.
goal or will for this other than just getting people heard? That's basically the function of Gen Spec.
Yeah, but there's also, I mean, it sort of depends how things pan out. But there's no shortage of projects. There's loads of things that we're really interested in doing in terms of like creating resources, because we know that there are some quite powerful, well-funded organizations which are putting out resources which are really not prioritizing long-term health. They're not saying, look, your best interests are served by putting yourself in a position where your body is able to carry you through life for as long as possible. And so there is a terrible lack of resources on our side. And so we've definitely got plans to counter that.
Okay. To actually put the informed into informed consent.
Right, because informed consent has to mean informed consent. So you've got two issues. You've got the issue of age and at what age you can make these decisions and all the rest of it. But then it's like, if informed consent isn't informed, then the whole model is broken, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have to have all the information available to you. So there's that part of the project which is about resources, and there's a stack of stuff that we're looking at doing to do with clinicians, and again, just kind of cementing this new alliance of clinicians and parents, and making sure that people have a way of sharing information and all that kind of stuff. So
I wonder, I really like that idea of, I don't know if women get together and do a little coven thing and talk to their daughters about menstruation, and then the entire life cycle of being fertile, and then the post-fertility time. I don't know if there's that kind of dedicated thing that goes on there, but what you guys are doing, putting together, like, here's your life on estrogen, here's your life on synthetic hormones, but also here's the social impact of that. Here's all the different steps you have to do. This is how you're actually asking people to change for you. And then, what does that actually mean? Can you enforce that on everybody? And I know that's the cultural thing, that we're just supposed to, everybody's just going to magically affirm you no matter what. But even if they are, what are they actually thinking on the inside?
Yeah, I know. I think that's one of the saddest things. And it's like, these kids think they're being polite. And they're like, yeah, I see you as a woman. And the boy's got like a massive jawline and is 6'2", and they're all kind of going, yeah, I see you as a woman. And they think they're being polite, but they're not. I think they're being cruel. I think they're being cruel. Maybe not purposefully cruel, but I think that the result of what they're doing is a cruelty, because you don't tell people those kind of falsehoods. And I think that when it's a whole generation, when everyone in that generation is too scared to say, do you know, I'm actually not sure I will ever look at you and see a woman, then they're going to get a very nasty shock. And that is the story we hear. We hear that from some of the people who start down this pathway, and then they kind of realize they were sold a pup, and that the people around them may have thought that they had their best interests at heart, but actually lying to somebody, it's funny, isn't it, that the phrase white lie usually has the word little at the front of it, a little white lie. Mm-hmm. This is a giant white lie. Mm. And,
it's committed in the name of empathy or politeness.
Right.
That's what whitewashes the lie.
But then you speak to somebody who's kind of like post-operative and has been living that life for 20 years, and they have to wake up like 45 minutes before they ever would have done, because it's like they have to put an awful lot of effort into passing as a member of the opposite sex. So, I spoke to somebody the other day who's a detransitioner after 30 years, that more than 30 years actually, living as a member of the opposite sex. And the relief at not having to every single day think, okay, have I got enough makeup on? Is my hair all right? What about the clothes I'm wearing? And just being able to walk out the door. And that's a huge thing. Now, that's not to say don't do it. It's to say it's a huge thing. And anyone who tells you that it's not a bother is lying to you. And you probably might want to look at whether they've got a financial vested interest, I would argue.
It's like with the dating thing, isn't it? Where they don't have realistic expectations. If you transition, then you are reducing your dating pool significantly, because people might not be into that for all sorts of reasons, and not because they're transphobic, but like you might not be into people who are surgically augmented. You might not be, like lesbians aren't going to be into you if you've got your penis there, but even if you've had your penis removed, they still might not. And just that there's no realistic expectations, and hence you get all these, these horrible self-righteous articles now, don't you? Like demanding that straight men must date trans women, and they're not given a realistic view of actually a lot of straight men won't, because they're going to want children and you're not going to be able to do that with them, and that's fine. They're entitled to that opinion, but instead it's no, everyone must validate me because and everyone has been. So
and there's a much wider point about this, which is that, like, if I were on the dating market and I wanted to date as a gay person, I would be looking for guys to date. That doesn't mean somebody who happens to be a guy now. That means somebody who grew up with the life experience of being male. That means somebody, for me, now I'm not trying to speak, but maybe there are other people who say, no, that's not relevant to me. But for me, it's really relevant. I wouldn't know where I stood with somebody who went through a female puberty and grew up as a woman. I would have no interest in that. It would just kill it for me. If I was on a date with somebody and they said, yeah, actually, until 5 years ago I was female, any spark that was there would disappear. Now, that's not a choice. I can't choose that. I don't necessarily even have to be able to explain it. I think my explanation is that I'm looking for somebody who has a commonality of experience in the same way that a heterosexual would look for somebody who doesn't have the commonality of experience, right? But it's not. I'm not just looking for somebody who now, right in this second, happens to take the form of a man and could have done something else last year, and that's not a choice. That's my orientation. I can't, that's the whole point of the gay rights movement, is that we can't be held responsible for that.
Did you guys see that video that was circulating this weekend about the lesbian who convinced herself that there is such a thing as a female penis, and that she spent years and years and years deconstructing why she thought that men and penises are related, but they're not related at all. And so she could be a lesbian and still get banged by broad bro? What would you say? Broad bro? A broad,
that is not a term I'm familiar with.
I don't know
a bro
that,
who's
yeah.
a broad, or a broad who's a bro? A broad bro? Broad?
Yeah, I saw that. I thought that was really, well, I thought it was really sad. Initially, I was thinking, well, maybe she was bisexual all along then, because, like, maybe. But then the way she was talking about how she'd had to deconstruct her sexuality, that made me really uncomfortable, because that's conversion therapy in the end, isn't it? That she's performed on herself.
Yeah. It's voluntary, so it's not bad if you do it to yourself. Yeah. But, you can brainwash yourself all day long. Nobody's going to stop you. I won't stop you.
Yeah, and also the idea of just putting those two words together, deconstructing sexuality, kind of makes me want to vomit. Like, I don't think you should have to do that unless you've got a paraphilia, in which case, yeah, okay, you're going to want to deconstruct that as part of the process of healing. But if that even works, I don't know. But why would you need to deconstruct homosexuality? I mean, fundamentally, it's not that complicated. It doesn't take that long to explain what lesbianism is. Like, why would you, And this whole thing becomes very self-involved, and that's the problem with transition, where it's not the last resort, is that they spend so much time, having gone through it, thinking about themselves. And there's very little social capital that you have if all you do is think about yourself. You're really restricting your ability to function in society.
Yeah, one of the biggest lessons of my life was to put my life behind other people's lives. And then my life got a lot better when I learned how to become a servant first, and selfish secondarily.
Well, you don't even have to be a servant. You just have to be curious. You have to be curious about other people, which you obviously are, because that's kind of your thing, right? Is you like to get into people and kind of see, well, what makes you tick and so forth. And that's enough. You don't have to necessarily.
Oh yeah, erase myself, or it's gonna be. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, to function in the world, my life works best when I'm, you know, even a job is you going and devoting your labor to something. And so what we want from our education system is to provide us with a range of opportunities or you know, at least knowledge of different things that we could do in the world so that we can go out in the world and be a functioning, useful member of society, which means that I put something into the system and I get something back. When you get into these mind spaces, a lot of this critical theory stuff kind of erects an image of the world in their head, and then your job is now to deconstruct the world and then create change in the world. Like that's somehow what you're supposed to do. And then with the gender stuff, what are you actually dealing with? What are you actually doing in the world other than putting up a flag? Like you're marking a territory. That's all you're doing. You're claiming the moon, and nobody's going to go there again because it's just a rock in space.
It's like, meanwhile, if you actually wanted to build and sell a chair, it would basically be economically impossible because it would be cheaper to do like a 400-mile round trip and buy a chair made in China. That's what's been happening. Well, I mean, who is it that says this is like, this is what we'll be discussing when the Chinese bomb us? I can't remember which quote that's from. It might be Douglas Murray, and it's kind of a bit of a funny way to put it, but it's like, yeah, this is a very economically hollowed out generation. But and partly that's our fault. Like it does slightly wind me up because I know I'm a bit rude and stuff. But when people just go after these kids on the internet, and it's like, okay, what are they going to do? What exactly are they going to do? What industry are they going to work in? Now there are answers to that, but not everyone can subsist on, like, you know, one of these studies degrees and so forth. And I would like to see much more financial accountability brought into colleges so that if people take these degrees, for example, I mean, I know that it's also about schools, but if people take these degrees and they're not useful, then these colleges should be shut down, you know? I mean, the obvious example in your case.
I think that they just lose their value. You know, ultimately, that's what's going to happen. These gender studies degrees will stockpile up, and you know, like with Grace, when Grace came on, she's another detransitioner. And again, she went to college, she studied gender, that got into her head, and then she just built this whole world, and then these steps to manifesting that world in her body. And she came out the other end with 2 missing body parts, and I don't know what else was compromised by being on the hormones too. But these things, it's not just that the ideas are worthless. It's not that gender studies is worthless. It's actively altering people's bodies. It's actively deconstructing society and the relationships between males and females.
It's vindictive in the way that Naima was obviously vindictive, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all I have is what I've seen of the videos you made, but it's like that's a person who's obviously got something else going on. Let's say it's not. Let's be careful and just say it's not. It's obviously not entirely about the curriculum and finessing the curriculum to the best point where it's going to be as materially useful in the world for the greater good. I think we can at least say that. Mm-hmm. And I think that I wish that somebody in the political world, somebody elected, had the confidence to come in and just say, actually, we'd rather that the number of people who went to university is kind of capped at like 15-20%. And just had the confidence to say that and to withstand all of the criticism that they would get, for which there's a good answer for most of those things.
Yeah, this is the odd thing, at least in Washington, even the trade schools now are forced to start to implement all these studies curriculum. Right? Even you go and you learn how to, you know, build a car or get electrical grid running, but you have to think about equity first and foremost. You have to think about all these disparate outcomes that this technology and this white Western maths implement.
But it's not like there isn't a model, because very few countries are doing this. Like, this is not happening in most Western. It's easy for us to forget that because of our language bias. Like, this is not happening in most Western societies.
No?
You know, no, it's not happening in Germany. It's not
Is
happening
it
in Italy.
Stella that says that one of the greatest risk factors for your child identifying as trans is that they're an English speaker?
It's the risk.
Yeah.
It's the risk
Oh,
factor.
no.
And if you go into the forum and look at the parents who are from from continental Europe, which is basically the only place this goes. I guess there's Brazil, but that's kind of a different case. It's all that the kid was off and learned English really well. That's why it's hit Scandinavia more than any other part of continental Europe, because the Scandies have very, very good English, and they don't dub, they subtitle.
Do you think this all comes down to Shakespeare wanting to wear a dress on the stage? He molded this into our language. You think maybe it comes down to that? We should go back and analyze Hamlet through a queer lens.
Oh, then they'll end up saying Shakespeare was trans. That'll be well, I mean, he had long hair, didn't he? So.
And an earring.
Yeah. And he liked lace, so.
It's all coming out.
Yeah. I think we've cracked it.
We've cracked it. Now we must build a time machine. No, I don't know what. No, but then it's a French idea. All of this stuff comes right. All of this deconstruction.
Well, then you have to go back to Germany, because it all goes back to Hegel and Kant and the transcendentalists or whatever, the idealists. They started.
Yeah, but they were. Yeah, okay. Well, I defer to your greater knowledge.
France.
Yeah, but it was the French theorists who actually kind of formulated it into this kind of nihilistic model. No.
Well, the Frankfurt School is kind of German, but if you say that, then you're flirting with anti-Semitism, because it turns out that most of the people in Frankfurt School were Jewish, but it doesn't really matter. Like, that's what they took, the Hegelian Marxist dialectic, they applied it to culture, and then later on down the road, some like Foucault and Derrida went over to America and souped it up into English, and then implemented it in the English universities. But if you see what's happening in France now, they're saying we've moved on from Foucault and this deconstructum stuff.
Well, I mean, plus Claire and I are both English, and there is an exemption which is written into every cell of our bodies, which is that if you're English, you can be as racist as you like about the French. It is kind of an unspoken.
Oh well, yeah.
Yeah, because they are filth. Let's face it.
Can blame it.
Yeah, but it's definitely, there's some kind of transmission of it through the English language.
That's really
and a lot of
weird.
This stuff doesn't work.
Why.
Well, note that like none of them are going across the border to Mexico and saying like your language has masculine as the norm, which it does.
Well, that's why the Latinx is come into being. So
but they don't say that in Spanish. Nobody says like Latinx in Spanish. They just say if you've got a mixed group, if you've got Latina and Latino, you just say Latino, and nobody seems to care. And the same sometimes that you get educational institutions and other agencies and whatnot who put out literature in Spanish and English, and they're saying Latinx in English, and they're just saying the masculine form in the Spanish. So.
I think that might have to do also with, this is a whole other conversation, but the influence of Protestantism or post-Catholic Church the way that we're thinking about things is detached from God, detached from community, detached from a grand narrative. It's just man and business and the self. And the self-interpretation of reality, you don't get interpreted from, the church doesn't interpret reality for you. You do it yourself, and that underpins a lot of the Western speaking countries, or at least it's in tension. Whereas in other Western states, they have a different relationship with the body politic and Catholicism, or at least how they got out of Catholicism.
You want to talk to David Starkey about that? Because David Starkey has this whole theory that the woke people are the direct descendants, the ideological direct descendants of the Salem witch trial people and the Cromwellian Protestant people who cancelled Christmas and all the rest of it. And it's that exact same low church instinct against the... It's certainly true that it's well, it's certainly true that it's like, with the exception of Britain and Ireland, where I think it's a bit more complicated, but it is Protestant Europe where this has slightly taken root. That slightly, some of the woke stuff. It hasn't worked at all in like Italy. People just laugh at it. I was talking to a colleague of mine who's Romanian, and it took me like half an hour to get through non-binary, and she's just like, "What?" And they just laugh. They just think it's stupid, you know.
Yeah, it is.
Then the Catholic Church aren't buying it, are they? Officially, they're not officially buying trans women and women. They've said.
Have they taken a stand on that? Have they issued their decree?
Yeah, they issued some statements on it, and that's not because you can't change your nature.
Yeah,
as God intended, kind of thing. So so maybe
in
that
the beginning,
helps.
man and woman,
yeah,
God created them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The exemption for gender critical viewpoints in British law, that was kind of the interesting part for me about the Maya Forstater case, was that I guess gender ideological viewpoint is okay. It's protected by law to have the viewpoint that male and female don't exist, that it's all a gender spectrum. But that came into clash with the gender critical viewpoint, was that male and female do exist, and it's not a stereotypical spectrum. It's this biological reality that's now a belief, which is odd. It's an odd way of putting that, but you're protected in noticing that there's a difference between a penis and a vagina, and then the entire endocrine system, and then the entire social structure erected around protecting and I guess suppressing that, if you wanted to go into the patriarchy theory stuff. But it kind of, the whole thing is protected.
Yeah, and it's a huge source of relief. I didn't realize how much it meant to me until the ruling came, and then I was like, this is massive. This is a really massive thing, because you can now turn around and say to, whoever it might be, an employer or police officer for that matter, saying, no, sorry, this belief is actually protected. That has been adjudicated. That is within law. Whereas before we were kind of stumbling around because we don't have the constitutional guarantees that you have.
Are you guys allowed to love J.K. Rowling? Or is that still contested over there?
Yeah, I think the book burning has stopped, which is not a sentence I expected to say, but that's where we are. The book, that's good news. The book burning stopped.
It was so funny. You've got all these like sort of trans activists with their Harry Potter tattoos talking about how they regretted their Harry Potter. Like, it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes you might, when you're young, make a decision about changing your body that you like later, sort of with new information, change your mind about.
Yeah. And it's really important if it's a tattoo. So what could be more important than a tattoo?
So Gen Spec is on the books now. It's out in the open. You guys are flying your flag. Do you guys have a flag yet?
Oh, we don't.
We don't.
You should make one.
Why not?
You should make one, because the war's coming. You're going to have to stake your turf.
I will. Does it have to have like a triangle for Black and Indigenous people of colour of Gen Spec in the corner?
I don't know. Indigenous parenting, is that a thing?
It's parenting. Feral, wild parenting. Yeah, why not? What's next for us? We've got so much that I think it's really a case of whatever it is that we have the time to do, because there's no shortage of ideas. And we've also had a huge amount of support, a lot more than I thought. I mean, I think we hoped it was going to be good, but it's been very good. So I think the main thing is to keep slogging away at the media and keep on, and we are doing, and we've got some really interesting stuff coming down the pipeline, some quite big stuff actually, just to do with placing stories, getting stories out. I'm equally interested in other projects like creating resources that kids can see and so forth. Because I think a lot of people have reached a point now, like I was talking to a mother the other day and she was like, yeah, I'm done crying. I'm done. I'm not going to cry anymore. I'm done being angry. I just would like some things to work on. And so there are a lot of people who kind of hit that point where they've worked through all of that and they would just like to do something which is for the good. And so that's what we can provide. And that's what we are providing. And then Claire is writing and has already been published, and yeah, we've got lots of stuff in the pipeline.
What are you working on, Claire?
I'm just I'm working. Well, it's just the thing with schools at the moment, but we're just trying to. It's quite tricky because parents are very nervous as well. You know, because this thing of like, what if the school reports you to social services? So trying to sort of work with parents as well to like find a way that we can like express things that isn't going to make them feel more vulnerable as well. So yeah, I'm doing that. But also, I'm also doing my other hat. I'll just plug my other charity. Because I also work with DSD families now, which is like an intersex. Although we don't use that word, charity. So I'm doing school stuff for them at the moment. That's just where I'm just fully immersed in the queer stuff going into schools and trying to unpick it from the trans and the intersex point of view.
Mm-hmm. You both seem like outsiders with regards to Gen Spec.
Well, we were talking about this.
Yeah,
it's like we're a bit weird because most people who come into this gender stuff, whether they're in Gen Spec or whether they're somewhere else, they're kind of fighting for their own group. So there's like the LGB people who are LGB and saying, we're LGB. And then there's the women's rights group who are saying, like, we're standing for women. And parents tend to stand for parents. And we're both people who've kind of wound up, we're childless, and yet we're kind of doing parent right advocacy work. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit odd. I grant you that, but I also think it's really, really helpful to have people who are on side with this, who aren't parents with kids who are going through this particular challenge, because for a start, it's not as emotionally draining. Like if you are somebody who has a kid going through this, the stakes of success and failure are just enormous, and it must crush you. Whereas it's like, we can try something, if it doesn't work, it's like, okay, it didn't work, next, keep on coming. And I think it's the same way that you wouldn't want somebody drunk running your AA meeting. I mean, it's a bit of a dodgy simile, but there is some kind of truth in that, right? You want somebody who has an interest, but is also,
or at least is out of the woods, or has a different perspective on the woods.
Yeah, and
by being in their own, I guess.
Yeah, and so that's why I think Stella and I and Claire, and there is a sort of positivity in the working relationship that has gone beyond just the parents going through this. It's quite, and has formed this bigger thing. But yeah, I don't know, Claire, do you have an answer for that? Because we're kind of weird in that sense, because you could have just said like, well, this has nothing to do with me. Yeah, and I could have been like, no, sorry, I'm off to join the LGB people.
I think like when Stella first, I can't remember if it was you or Stella that first talked to me about it. I think it might have been Stella. And kind of one of the reasons that I was asked is because I'm already out there talking about it. So I'd already talked about schools and things, and the breakdown with like parental relationships with schools from like a teacher's point of view. And I'm just like, if I can, because I'm already out there, so it doesn't, what does it matter to me? You know, I'm not scared of being seen or like, and I don't mean that as like a judgment of anyone that isn't out there. Like, so just being able to give that public face to people who are frightened to do that. A lot of the parents don't want to speak publicly because it's their child and they're protecting their child as well. Yeah. So that, like, why not? Why would I not do that if I can help?
So you found yourself in the position of just being a lifelong activist and advocate.
Yeah, accidentally, yeah. This is never the plan, but it's quite nice just to like go with the flow, though, isn't it? Sometimes see where it takes
Activism is like power. You can only trust people who don't want it or engage in it reluctantly. Accidental and reluctant activists are
I kind of agree with that, actually. The more I've been in this, the more like, yeah, I think that there might be something in that a little bit. And I think the other thing is everyone has their sort of, we have to have some kind of limit on this, because let's remember this started, because, well, not started entirely, but a lot of this was to do with organisations which had got everything they wanted and then we're like, oh, what do we do now? So we have to be a bit skeptical, because like ultimately I suppose what we're saying is we don't actually want Gen Spec to have to exist, right? Because we'd like to complete the goal of getting the guidelines in place and there's guardrails in place and so forth, and we can say, well, okay, well, there we are, we've done what we came to do. And there is something about the kind of permanent activist that's a bit ropey, frankly, and people should also have some kind of other life to go back to, I think, because it's not a good economic model. Like we can't have an economy that's based on campaigners and activists,
NGOs,
like blogging and stuff. That's, so yeah.
I remember saying that to a friend of mine when I first started on Twitter writing about having a DSD and just my objection to like the appropriation of it. And a friend of mine saying, because I had like a personal Twitter account, and he was like, will you ever come back to your personal Twitter? And I was like, well, I hope so, because this account shouldn't have to exist. So I hope for one day, I mean, it doesn't exist now because it's banned, but like I hope for one day for it not to need to exist, because it's kind of, it's a bit obscene really that it had to exist to begin with. So I didn't, I don't want this to be a career necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking about, for my own part, I probably have 120 gender interviews, and there's still so much more to map out. There's a lot more representation for male detransitioners, especially, that I think it's difficult to secure those voices, and they're not often heard. The stories just aren't as attractive as a female. There's something, at least for me, I resist ever thinking of men as victims of anything other than their own hubris or idiocy, right? So I kind of more protective of females, and so seek and lift up their voices, and I think that's reflected in when men make a mistake like that, they kind of hide it and kind of go on with their lives and don't want to really put it out there, even if it would help other men. I don't know if
it's
that's
really tough.
Nurture
it's
nature.
Really tough, because they can't return, like the women can return to sisterhood, right? They can return to feminism.
Women have feminism, sisterhood, yeah.
That seems to be what a lot of detrans women have become attracted to that as well, haven't they? In finding their community again there.
A number of them go.
The men, I think, are all alone.
Yeah, the men are it's very lonesome. It's very lonesome. So there's that work to do.
Yeah, but I think that it must. Yeah, I mean, you've made so much content, and you must have so many emails saying thank you all the time, right? You must do, because you've done a lot more than I do, and I can't even answer them all. Like people, kind of all sorts of weird people.
Maybe once a month, nobody thanks me for what I do. Well, there's the comment field, so people.
Yeah, I guess I'm not doing anything which kind of has a comment field, so I've deliberately.
Well, you come off as knowledgeable, whereas I'm just kind of like this hollow shell that's reflecting the world back on itself. You actually produced like a long-running series on this issue, so people think that you have a lot to say.
Yeah, and that's very flattering. I mean, to an extent, I think that, like, it was partly just that the group that found me, and I was like, yeah, I'll write about this, and then they kind of just took me hostage, like, do everything we say. That's why it was really funny when one of the comments was like, this guy has obviously tricked these women into believing that anime has a role in their lives, and he's obviously coerced them into seeing this trans thing as like a really bad thing for their sons. And the group leader rang me up, and she couldn't stop laughing, and she was like, we literally took you hostage until you agreed to put in all of the statistics that we said, and now you're being accused of being this really powerful figure. And there is a recurring theme in this of the men who get involved immediately being assumed to be very, very powerful and influential. I don't know if that's something which kind of rings a bell with you, but sometimes, like, if you're a man and you dip your toe into this water, you're immediately assumed to be coming to it with some sort of goal and like working that into the conversation and manipulating other people. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but a couple of people have sort of insinuated that I'm really powerful in these parents' lives, and I'm like, have you met me? Like, really, genuinely, no.
Yeah, I don't know. The only time I've been canceled, it's been by the feminists. I haven't been canceled by the trans activists for whatever reason. They don't think I'm important. Plus, all my work is exploratory, so it's hard to pin anything on me other than my snarky tweets. And then they just block all transphobes. So, yeah, they block puberty and transphobes. That's what they do on Twitter.
Well, I think the other thing is if you have a go at, like, not necessarily have a go at, if you take issue with a particular feminist critique, you are actually debating something real. There are real stakes, whereas a lot of this stuff with, like, the kind of stuff that a TRA would go after you for, it's not that real, you know, the kind of, so the debate kind of fizzles out quite quickly. Whereas, you know, the fact that you like to wind up feminists, I mean, don't get me wrong, it makes for great social media content for the rest of us. Whether it's great for you to be on the receiving end of, that's a different question.
Yeah. Everybody likes a good pillory, you know. You offer yourself to the mob, and it kind of like it relieves some of their stress, you know. So you're kind of providing a service.
I'm not sure that's the only thing which motivates you.
I don't know. Nothing really motivates me. I just stumble around, and every once in a while I get a reaction. There's no intentionality. There's very little, other than trying to listen and lift up women for some reason. That's what I like to do. And then also to try to help children enter into a better world. And then also to kind of model a good male behavior, as I see what I'd like to see more of with regards to how men act.
It was a very humble kind of, you turned that into a very humble thing there at the beginning. It was sounding quite harlequinish, and then suddenly you're a saint. It's great. It was good. Brag. Humble brag, yeah.
Oh, fuck that. I'm cutting this shit out. This is not making it in the interview. Thank you for taking the piss. Do you guys give the piss or take the piss? I don't understand how that works out there. When you're taking the piss, does that mean that you're slandering yourself, or you're humbling yourself, or when you're taking the piss, you're throwing shade on somebody else? You guys don't know this term.
So taking the piss is there's a lot of things which taking the piss is to mock somebody, but it could also be to take a liberty. It could be to
not take something seriously as well.
Yeah, it's like if you lent me 20 quid and then I never paid it back and just pretended we forgot about it, I'm kind of taking the piss out of you. Do you know what I mean?
You're taking the piss out of...
Yeah, you only ever take the piss out of somebody. You can't take the piss out of yourself. Well, you can take the piss out of yourself. Yeah. How do Americans deal with not having that lexical item? It's like how Americans don't have a word for cheeky. Like, how can you deal with not having the word cheeky? It's so useful. And I never know how to translate, like how to say it, because it's like, it's so, you're communicating so much with one word.
Mind you, it's like, but then like in British English, because in the North they have the word Mardy, which they don't have in Southern English, which I think is a loss too.
Is that an adverb, Mardy?
Mardy, no, it's an adjective. But Mardy has a translation as Larry.
No, it's not really. Because it's like more like moody, like a toddler, isn't it?
This is where the Northerner tells me that I don't understand the North. Mardy's a sexist. It's only women are Mardy.
No, it's like it's for children. It's like it was really used to describe children, like moody behaviour in children, and then like so if you're an adult and you're being Mardy, then you really should grow up. Like
okay, so
I don't know like, what the equivalent word is. Like
curlish.
It's very like specific. It feels like one of those words that you know what you mean when you say it, but trying to translate it is quite tricky.
Cheeky is like, I don't understand. It's really difficult because somebody asked this on Twitter. Like somebody said, I'm going out for a cheeky takeaway, and somebody came back and was like, what does cheeky mean? Like, Jesus, it's like a whole paragraph to describe what cheeky means.
It's more difficult than non-binary, isn't it?
It's more difficult than non-binary. There's very few non-binary people in the forum. Have you noticed that?
In the what?
Yeah, parents of non-binary. There's not much of that.
Well,
is that more of them like feel that it's just like a phase thing though, with a lot of, like I think like my nephew talking about his friends, and I think about a lot of the parents just thinking that's just like a little phase thing that their group's doing, and they're not too worried about it because there's no, well, for them yet, there's no hormones or anything involved or wanting medical procedures or anything. It's just like this sort of trying on of thing.
It's kind of like a gay-themed gangster rap kind of thing. It's just something that the kids are into.
Yeah, it's just
right.
We don't need
Is there such a thing as gay-themed gangster rap?
I don't know. That particular community is not known for its acceptance of the homosexual.
No, that's true. That doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist, though, does it?
No.
There's something out there for everybody, so it probably does exist.
We all have our flag. We all have our flag.
Yeah.
Have you looked at queer vexillology, the Reddit?
There's actually...
Oh my God, it's enormous. It goes on. There's thousands. There's like tens of thousands.
Is it like political compass memes? Is it cheeky? Is it tongue in cheek?
No. There's no.
They're very serious
at all. It's people coming in and being like, I couldn't find a flag for like non-binary fucking whatever. And they post these diagrams that would have like 16 flags, and it will be like demisexual boy tilted by romantic and stuff, and they've just made it's incredible. I mean, it must be
it's like a crafting circle.
Yeah, seriously, queer vexillology. I showed it to the editor from Quillette, and he was like, "Is this actually real, though?" And I was like, "No, it's real, and it's bottomless. It just keeps on going."
It was like the permanent reinvention of the Pride flag, isn't it? Because there's a new one now that includes the intersex circle.
Yeah, the purple circle on a yellow background. It's so disgusting. I'm sorry that you have those color combinations.
It's really horrible. But the guy who made it, it's like done him wonders, because now he gets to go all over the world and speak about the intersex because he invented the intersex flag. So and that's how he sort of does it. It's like, I'm the inventor of the intersex flag.
Yeah, it's like a hashtag. Like I like when people say, like, I invented this hashtag that went viral for a while. Like that's a claim to
the symbolism of the intersex flag.
So I think it's yellow and purple so that they weren't like gendered colours. And then the circle is supposed to represent, I can't believe I know this because it's such bullshit. The circle is supposed to represent completeness. So without surgery, people with intersex variations would be complete.
Surely then the circle should be filled in rather than hollow.
Maybe. And then also it made me laugh then when they added it to the trans flag, because you've got the people of colour coming in and slicing the circle in half. So it's like the purpose of it.
I hope that all these identities move on from flags and start claiming wildlife, like a state flower and a state bird. I think that they should round out their identities.
You guys have so many of them, and like half of your states, like every single state between like Montana and Ohio, the state drink is milk. Have you seen that? Like so many of your states.
We have state drink. We have state beverages. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're on Wikipedia, and it's like the Dakotas and Wisconsin and whatever. It's all like milk. Yeah, we don't do that kind of thing at all.
Huh.
Well, I guess we do a bit, but we don't like. Yeah.
Don't you guys like have poetry contests or something like that?
It used to confuse me growing up when they used to talk about things like national dress. You know, like the national dress of like Denmark or the national dress of Germany, and kind of like, what's ours? And like we don't really seem to have anything like that. I don't know.
Well, it was the suit, wasn't it? The thing is, it went so international that it's like it's absurd. If you saw a Japanese politician wearing a suit and went like, "Oh, that's cultural appropriate," but it is like we invented the men's suit, I suppose,
and we invented the jeans. We have jeans. You guys have the suit.
Yeah,
but they all worldwide.
Yeah. And it's absurd to kind of say like, oh, you're dressed like an American, you're wearing jeans. Like you just sound like a fool. Yeah. And also like the Welsh national dress, that was just made up apparently by the Victorians. Like they just found some Welsh people and put stupid hats on them. And went, this is what you dress like.
That reminds me of when I went, it's like off topic completely. When I went to China, we went to a place where It was like a food market, and they'd got like it was like everything was on sticks, like insects and snakes and things like that. And they were like selling it as like, this is like what the Chinese people eat. And we were all there trying. Then I looked around and I thought, every single person eating this shit is not Chinese. Like what a grift.
That's like the Irish bars in Dublin. The Irish bars in Dublin, like all of the staff are like Lithuanian and Polish. All of them, and you just and all of the people who are drinking in them aren't Irish, because the Irish people just drink in, actual pubs, rather than like Grandma O'Murphy's traditional, authentic, revolutionary Irish fuck the Brits pub, which is just full of fucking Americans being served drinks by Poles.
I really do think all these identities, if we keep on pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, maybe it will develop into something more cultural, like more rounded out, like not just a flag and a hashtag, but like something to stake some sort of territory, some sort of manifestation in the world that this thing exists and this is how we act and dress and talk, or something like that. I guess the pronoun thing is going in that direction, but it's also linguistic. It's also virtual. It's also lexicon graphic. It doesn't really actually, other than the medicalization, it doesn't exist.
It's kind of like the canton of the self. It's almost like you're turning yourself into your own little mini nation.
Yeah.
Which isn't, it's not that sustainable, but...
Have a little declaration, have a fight with your parents, and then go out and declare your independence, your own statehood.
I would have done it. I can completely see myself doing that. But there is something like, we should applaud people for kicking back against their parents. You have to do it in some way. Just not this way, but you have to do it in some way.
There isn't a lot of counterculture for kids, though, is there?
No,
it's all appropriated.
Where are the goths these days?
Well, they're Visigoths now, right? They like mutate into something else.
Visigoths.
The Goths are just architecture. Well, yeah, where is Robert Plant? No, not Robert Plant. Robert Cure
Smith.
guy. Robert Smith. Is he around? Does he lurk?
I don't know.
You don't know.
Oh, he seems like the kind of person
they're
I'd be
really
really
quite,
disappointed.
I
don't go and find famous people now because I'm so often disappointed by what they believe.
I thought you can say because you thought because they're dead. They're all quite. Some of the punks are quite right wing now, like Johnny Rotten, and there's others as well who are like, I can't believe the left is now the conformist, boring thing, and I'm stuck with the right. But the most important thing to them was to be contrarian and non-conformist, so they've ended up like being Tories.
Reactionary Tories.
Reactionary Tory.
Punk Tory. Well, cool. Do you guys have any advice to wrap up the episode with? A little earworm for the people at home or wherever they might be.
It's I guess I should say, like, if you're genuinely distressed, they say, having chuckled away for some time, and you are looking for help, go to genspect.org. Other than that, not really. I can't think of anything that we're missing, other than a society which makes sense. So if you can work on that, Benjamin, that'd be good.
Coming up next.